We are joined for our final session of the day with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have her try to unpack what has gone on over these past couple of weeks and, frankly, where this country is headed over the next several years. Senator, thank you so very, very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. We're going to have fun.
Let's have fun. I have so many questions, selfishly curious to understand how you think about it. But the thing that I think we're all trying to make sense of right now is the message that you think the outcome of this election really means. And what I mean by that is the Democrats have won the White House, but have lost 10 seats in the House. And we will see what happens in the Senate. And I'm trying to understand whether we think that this is an endorsement or a repudiation of the more progressive values that I know you've argued for, or if it's something about centrism. What is it? What's your take on what this means?
So look, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won by more than 5 million votes. It was record turnout. And they won by running on the most progressive agenda that a general election candidate has ever run on in the United States of America. And it wasn't just what happened with Joe and Kamala. Florida said, we're tired of waiting for the federal government, and they went for $15 an hour minimum wage. Arizona said, we're going to tax rich people more so that we can invest in public education. Colorado said, we've had it. We're going to go ahead and do paid family and medical leave for everybody in the state. That is remarkable. Think about what that means. So I see it as a time when Americans are saying we need to make changes in this country, and we need to make the kinds of changes that increase opportunity, that touch people's lives. So for me, it means it is a mandate to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to do the things we can do, to cancel student loan debt for tens of millions of Americans. Single biggest stimulus we could add to the economy. Put an investment in childcare because we can do it. Raise the minimum wage for everybody who works for a federal contractor to $15 an hour. Get the pandemic and the economy under control. So I think they've got a pretty clear agenda in front of them. It is huge, but a lot of tools in their toolbox and a lot that they can do. So get out there and do as much good as you can.
Okay,
That's my view.
I want to dig into all those things, but I do want to just ask you about one comment, because it does get at this issue of how much of a mandate there really is in this regard. This is a comment made reportedly by Congressman Abigail Spanberger of Virginia. You may have read this before. She said, "We lost races we shouldn't have lost. Defund the police almost cost me my race because of an attack ad. Don't say socialism ever again. We need to get back to basics." What do you make of that?
I'm not going to attack people's campaign tactics, but we need to make clear what we stand for as Democrats, and we need to be willing to get out there and argue for it. And for me, let's talk about one of the clearest parts of it, and that is our economic agenda, which is wildly popular across this country. Nobody lost any election over let's cancel student loan debt. Let's expand Social Security. Let's expand universal child care and universal pre-K. Let's make sure that everybody has access to affordable health care. Those are the things that Americans care about right there in their lives. And I'll tell you something else they care about. They don't want an economy, they don't want a government that is run by a bunch of lobbyists, a bunch of insiders, and just a bunch of corporate folks.
Well, let me ask you specifically about the Biden tax plan, because we are still in the midst of the pandemic, and there is a debate about whether we should be raising taxes during a pandemic at a time when there's still conversations ongoing about the need for stimulus. We can talk about student debt as well as a form of stimulus. But where do you land on raising taxes at this moment?
Look, Joe Biden has said, President-elect Biden said that he will not raise taxes on those making less than $400,000 a year. And I think that makes sense. I want us to make investments. Investments are stimulus spending. Look, pick universal child care. Here's one. We need to make a huge investment, and look what it would do for the economy. It would let mamas and daddies finish their education, let them go back to work, people who are otherwise locked at home. What else would it do? It would keep a lot of little businesses up and going. Oh, and here's the third part. If we make part of that improving wages for every child care worker, then we're going to lift the salaries of tens of millions of people, mostly women of color. You know, that's the kind of thing we need to be doing. Now, the Republicans want to cry austerity, but let's be clear. They gave buckets of money to billionaires. What we need to do is we need to be saying, nope, we're going to have more progressive taxation, and we're going to invest in making this economy work for everyone. We need to do that in a pandemic. We need to do it all the time.
I want to get to some of those issues, but personal question. Do you want to be part of this administration?
So look, I'm not going to comment either on myself or the specifics about anybody else on the cabinet. What I am going to say, and I'm always glad to say, personnel is policy. And I think it is really important that we have people in this administration who understand the magnitude of the health crisis that we face, who understand the magnitude of the economic crisis that is right behind that health crisis, and who have a real ambition for making the federal government work for people, making it meet the moment. That's what I want to see us do.
Okay, let me ask it a different way. You've been, you know, people talk about whether you could be up for being the Treasury Secretary. If you were the Treasury Secretary, what's the first thing you would do?
You know, right now, we've got to get this pandemic under control. The economy cannot reopen in any meaningful way until we actually have a plan to deal with the pandemic. And letting people die, which is what Donald Trump is doing, is not a plan. Hoping that there are folks out there who will find access to personal protective equipment and have adequate testing is not a plan. I am so glad to see President-elect Biden focused immediately on the pandemic. And look at the people he put in charge: doctors, healthcare professionals, people who are public health experts, people who will come in and say, look, this is what it's going to take to get this thing under control. And that's what we got to do. We get it under control and try to support as many people while we're doing that. That's why we need a stimulus package right now out of the Congress. And then we talk about what it's going to take to rebuild this economy. You know, I'm really worried, and this K-shaped recovery, we run a real risk right now that the next 4 years, because of the pandemic, could take inequality that was already on a disastrous path for our nation and make it far worse. We're going to have to take steps in the opposite direction to make sure that we have an economy that works for everyone. That has to be at the heart of everything that happens in this next administration.
How concerned are you right now about this transition process? And maybe I should just ask it to you directly. Are you worried about a coup?
I am very worried about the transition process. And at different points, Donald Trump threatens in different ways. But you know, here's what really has me worried. Where are the rest of the Republicans? Okay, we have all just kind of baked into our assumptions that Donald Trump is going to put no one's interests front and center except his own. But the Republicans who aren't calling him out, that is dangerous. And this is not a game. People around the world, people who would do us harm, are watching what's happening. They're watching the delay in the transition. The pandemic is raging out of control. We have nearly 1 million new cases in a week. And Trump is all about Trump, and he is being enabled by the Republicans in the House and the Senate, and that is outrageous and it is dangerous.
When you talk to your peers, Republican peers, and I imagine you have this conversation with them, maybe over the telephone, maybe not, what do they tell you? What do they say to you privately?
You know, nobody wants to talk about it. I mean, this is one of the things that's amazing about this. It really is a kind of hear no evil, see no evil. No, I didn't pay attention. They just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. And it's a way, in my view, just to evade taking any responsibility for it. This is a moment when every Republican in the United States Senate needs to stand up and say, we're done. This election was called. Joe Biden won. He won by more than 5 million votes. And there's been an effort after effort after effort to delegitimize this election. We are not going to be a party to that. It is wrong. They've gone to court over and over and been knocked around and thrown out because they've got no evidence here. Nothing about widespread fraud, and yet they keep trying to do it. And for the Republicans, people are supposed to be leaders in this nation, not to stand up and put democracy, put our nation ahead of Donald Trump, is dangerous to all of us. And truly, they should be ashamed for this.
So let me ask you a question. This maybe goes back to our first question about where the country is. There are clearly a lot of Trump supporters in this country who are willing to support many of those Republicans who are not speaking out, in large part because they feel that they have the political will of at least some group of people that may act as their base. And my question to you is what that means for democracy, but also what it means for Democrats and your ability to get across the finish line, if you will, some, if not many, of the policy proposals that you want to enact.
You know, though, listen to what you just said. And I think you very well describe it, but listen to it. What you're saying is they have found that it is politically convenient not to speak up. That's not what public service is about. That's not what leadership is about. There comes a time when there is a sufficient threat to your nation, when the matter is urgent enough that whatever the politics, it's time to speak up. And that is the case in a transition. A peaceful transition is the heart of democracy. It is how the pieces work. It's how we go year by year and how we say, in a democracy, it is the election that matters. So on this one, I don't relieve them of any responsibility by saying it works out politically for them. But what it does tell me is that to get things done going forward, it's going to, in my view, take two things. One is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris need to use all of the tools, and I mean all of the tools of their administration, the tools of executive order, but also the tools of the agencies. Right. That's part one, because the American people want them to get things done. But the second is it means that now that the election's over, people can't just go home. Right. We don't live in a world where we can now say, I voted, I'm done, I'm quitting. Right. It's that people are going to have to stay engaged to hold government accountable. And that means holding Joe Biden accountable, and it means holding these Republicans accountable. I believe if people stay engaged, then we are here in Washington more inclined to do the people's business.
I know we only have 2 more minutes, so I'm going to go rapid fire with you, if I could. During your campaign, you said that you would investigate President Trump after he left office, potentially prosecute him. Would you still potentially in this instance?
Look, my view is we are a rule of law nation, and that means we need to hold people accountable when they break the law.
Irrespective. Okay. Education. If we fix student debt, current student debt, what do we do about the long-term cost of education? Because higher ed, as you know, is through the roof, and getting rid of the debt unto itself, while it'll help a lot of people, is not necessarily going to help the problem, which we'll have in 10 and 20 years again if it continues this way.
You're exactly right. We need to do both parts together, and that is cancel out the student loan debt overhang, which President-elect Biden can do all by himself, and we need collectively to make an investment in our public colleges, universities, and technical schools so that people, our historically black colleges and universities, so that people can get an education without going into debt. I just want to remind everybody, I went to what was then a commuter college, cost $50 a semester down in Texas, got my 4-year diploma, and became a special education teacher. Why did that happen? Because America used to invest in the education of our kids, not just rich kids, not just kids born into well-to-do families, and not just kids who were willing to take on $1 zillion in debt. It was invest in all our kids, and I think that's what we ought to do for our babies and for our kids post-high school.
Okay, three other quick ones. You've long talked about how you think that people in industry, especially the lobbyist community, should not be part of the administration. My question to you is, in terms of expertise, though, do you believe that anybody from Wall Street or big business should be allowed to be in the administration?
Look, remember, I hired people whose background was from Wall Street when I set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The question is, what does your overall team look like? It is important to have a team that brings a lot of different perspectives. I think that's really critical.
Okay, we had some great news about the vaccine, as you know, from Moderna and Pfizer. You have been very critical. In fact, I believe you called for his resignation, talking about this issue of lobbyists and industry folks, of Mansell Slaoui. He is a former pharma exec who runs Operation Warp Speed. Now that they are getting more kudos, do you have a different view?
So look, think how you introduced him just now. Not just a former executive, he is a current major investor. He has money. And anyone who has money on the line in the outcome of something that has a government investment and is determining where that government investment is going to go, that is a conflict of interest. He has a conflict of interest, and that means he should not be simultaneously representing the taxpayers of the United States of America and his own personal wealth, period.
Okay, and final question, and it's a personal one. You ran for president. I want to know personally, what was the biggest lesson for yourself in the experience? What do you think you learned from it? Is there something that you've taken away and that you learned either about yourself or the experience?
Probably that millions of people across this country are willing to sacrifice, are willing to work hard to try to build an America that doesn't just work for themselves, but that works better for everyone. I did town halls, just zillions of them, and afterwards always did selfie lines. And the number of people who would ask questions, who would show up, who would talk in a town hall, in a selfie line, about the things they wanted to see just to make our country work better. People who were in their 60s, who just wanted to see us make an investment in childcare so that mamas and daddies could go to work. People who were in their 20s who actually wanted to see us make an investment to expand Social Security and disability payments. I think Americans are fundamentally good and generous people, and we want to make this country work for everyone. It really was a wonderful experience.
Senator Warren, we very much appreciate you being with us today. Thank you so very much. I hope it's nice to see you virtually. I hope next time we get to do it in person.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
You bet.